Hi everyone and welcome to this Waterstones Instagram Live. I'm Simon of Savidge and I'm delighted that I'm going to be hosting this event with Robert Jones Jr. about his fantastic debut novel, The Prophets, which I have a lovely proof of here. And hopefully any second, I always get a bit nervous about the technology bit because you never know what's going to happen. So yeah, but for those of you who have hello, Robert.
Hi, Simon. How are you? It's great to see you again.
I am so good. But first of all, I have to say before anything, huge congratulations on publication day. How does it feel?
My heart, I'm surprised you can't see it beating. It's like I have been in alternate states of disbelief, shock, and panic, but it's all been joyful. It's hard to it's hard to imagine that a dream that I've held for this long has actually come true. So
Yeah.
it's a blessing.
And I have to say, huge congratulations because, as you know, I mean, I've banged on about this book a lot. I think The Prophets is a genuine masterpiece. I've never read anything quite like it. It has lived with me, haunted me, sort of just stayed very much with me since I read it last year. And I wondered if you could introduce the book a little bit.
Sure. Plot-wise, The Prophets is about two enslaved young men named Samuel and Isaiah who are in love. And the rest of the book sort of examines how that love either disturbs, inspires, angers all of the other people living on that plantation, whether enslaved or enslaver. And there's also a thread throughout the book where ancestors speak and give us a little bit of backstory to how we're led to this idea that what Samuel and Isaiah are is sinful or wrong. And that is The Prophets in a nutshell.
That's a very good nutshell because it's a book that spirals in so many different ways. And actually, that mention there that you had of the sort of ancestors in this chorus voice, that links into a little bit of a reading that I sneakily asked you if you do.
I will do so only because you asked, Simon. I would not do this for anyone else. Okay, I'm reading from a chapter called Judges. It opens the book and it's the ancestors speaking directly to the reader and also perhaps directly to the other characters that show up in the novel. Judges. You do not yet know us. You do not yet understand. We who are from the dark, speaking in the seven voices, because seven is the only divine number, because that is who we are and who we have always been. And this is law. By the end, you will know, and you will ask why we did not tell you sooner. Do you think you are the first to have asked that question? You are not. There is, however, an answer. There is always an answer, but you have not yet earned it. You do not know who you are. How could you possibly reckon with who we are? You are not so much lost as you are betrayed by fools who mistook glimmer for power. They gave away all of the symbols that hold sway. The penance for this is lasting. Your blood would have long been diluted by the time reason finally takes hold, or the world itself will have been reduced to ash, making memory beside the point. But yes, you have been wronged, and you will do wrong again and again and again until finally you wake, which is why we are here speaking with you now. A story is coming. Your story is coming. It is the whole purpose of your being there here. The first time you arrived, you were not in chains. You were greeted warmly and exchanged food, art, and purpose with those who knew that neither people nor land should be owned. Our responsibility is to tell you the truth. But since you were never told truth, you will believe it a lie. Lies are more affectionate than truth and embrace with both arms. Prying you loose is our punishment. Yes, we too have been punished. We all have, because there are no innocents. Innocence, we have discovered, is the most serious atrocity of all. It is what separates the living from the dead. Eh? Or what this now? Ha ha. Forgive our laughter. You thought you were the living and we were the dead? Ha ha.
Oh, it gives me chills, and that opening chapter, and I can see it's doing the same for a lot of people. That line about innocence, and about who is dead and who is not, really does flow throughout the book, and it's a theme definitely. Like, how innocent is somebody? Can we truly ever be truly innocent? Are we born innocent? Do we die gaining innocence? Was that something you wanted to write about before we get to how the book came about?
Well, I didn't know at first that that would be a theme in the book. I sort of discovered it as I was creating these characters and having them interact with one another. What I found was that none of them are completely pure, whatever that means, but they are all deeply human. And so that raised the question for me as to whether people who are flawed or who are not pure deserve liberation too. Or is liberation and justice reserved only for those who are absolutely pure? And what does that mean? Because there is not, other than an infant, maybe, there's no one on earth who is absolutely pure. And so I started wrestling with this idea of innocence, which James Baldwin actually talked about a great deal, about how it prevents people from knowing themselves when they cling to this idea that in order to be right, they have to be innocent. And so, yeah, it sort of came out in the process of me writing the book.
Now, if your reading is going to given people chills like it has me, actually, how the book came to be gave me chills, because you describe it as being whispered to, and that you started to hear these whispers. Could you tell us about that?
Oh yes, I am not a religious person, but I do feel that there is some force at work that is greater than myself, that is unknowable, and that is um, the force that brought us to be, the entire universe, the endless multiverse. I don't know if it's intelligent. I don't know if it's aware of me as a living being. But I do feel like my presence here is a blessing, and just a miracle, an absolute miracle. And that goes for every living thing and everything that exists. But I do feel a connection to my familial line, um, particularly being a descendant of enslaved Africans. When I speak to the elders in my family, the stories that I hear, the ways they look at the world in these really magical and spiritual and sort of non-Western ways, is just so enticing, and it fulfills a need somewhere in me to know the world as something other than cruel, to know it also as mysterious and mystical. And so I tend to think when I hear these whispers, yes, a psychologist will probably tell you it's your own consciousness talking to you. It's your own um, mind speaking to you're speaking to yourself essentially. But sometimes it feels outside of myself, and for my own comfort, I like to think of those voices as my ancestors telling me things, guiding me. Um, my friend Charisse, one of my best friends, she always says, your gut is your God. And so when I hear those whispers or feel that tingle, I like to think of that as familial ancestors leading me, talking to me, whispering to me, telling me to be a particular kind of witness. And that is actually how the voices, the ancestral voices in this book came to be. I dreamt I heard a voice. I wrote something down in the middle of the night. I didn't even remember what I wrote. It was in the dark. And it was the first line in the book. You do not yet know. It was that line. And so I had to incorporate it in some way. And the ancestral voice seemed the best way to do it.
So you had the ancestral voices, this choral voices, if you will. Where did Isaiah and Samuel come from and their love story, which when the book opens, honestly, it made me cry with pure joy because they are in this barn on this plantation and they are going through horrendous times, but there is just this pure sanctuary that they have together. Where did that relationship come from?
Um, I had in my first semester of grad school, Stacy Derasmo was my fiction tutorial instructor, and she gave the class an assignment. She told us to go out into the world and find objects that a character that we're thinking about in a story we're thinking about writing might possess. And this book had been swirling a bit in my consciousness, but it hadn't solidified. And I was terrified of actually thinking that I could write a story like this. But I happened to find a pair of shackles on the street in the garbage in New York City. And that was to me a sign telling me that I could write this book. I picked up these shackles. They were heavy. I knew the character was enslaved. And I went home and started sketching out what his life would be like. And it was Samuel, who would eventually become Samuel. At first, his name was Simon. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to write about a queer, Black, enslaved person in antebellum uh, America, he can't be alone. He has to have love. And so that's when Isaiah, who was originally called Hannibal, came to be. And from there, it was, okay, now I need to craft a chorus of people who can witness this love and have various reactions to it. And that is how all the other characters develop. So The Prophets is utterly a character-driven novel. They drive the plot. They tell me what they want. Like, they drive the language, all of it. It comes from the characters.
It's so interesting hearing you say that because the novel to me felt like it spirals out from Isaiah and Samuel really, and you as you slowly but surely introduce us to these other people within the novel, their viewpoints, and actually a question that a friend of mine, Jack, was asking was how that came to be, that sort of how you introduce different characters at different points that carry on the story, but yet from different perspectives, yet you as the reader get the whole thing. Like, how did you do that?
Luck. Um, I
It's never luck. I don't believe in luck anymore. I think it's all work.
um, work. When I first wrote it, the chapters felt too disconnected. It almost felt like separate stories. And my editor, Sally Kim, and my agent, PJ Mark, really helped me to make the chapters feel holistic so that Samuel and Isaiah were always at the core. No matter who was speaking, it was always revolving around the two of them, as Maggie calls them. And that you felt like, I know that Maggie knows Essie, and I know that Essie knows Pua, and I know that Pua knows Sarah, and that they all live together and love and have arguments and all of these things. That just took tons of revision, of my editor looking at it and saying, could you make this seem a little bit more connected, and things of that nature. So it really just took a ton of work, and it just, and I know you don't believe in luck, but I think I'm lucky that it kind of worked.
I don't know. I genuinely, I do believe in luck to a point, but I think also we often say, "Oh, it was luck" when we're feeling a bit like we don't want to say, "Well, we worked really hard for it." And I think we should be out there. And you know, this is such a beautifully crafted novel, and I wanted to talk to you about some of the characters, but just going forward, I found it really interesting because the novel for me shifts. It's still very much about Isaiah and Samuel, but it actually takes on a lot of the views of the women, particularly. And I wondered why or what it was about those women's voices, because, and actually, I've just seen that Jacqueline of 6 Minutes for Me has just said in the comments, every single character has a completely different voice. You know exactly whose narrative you're within, even though you're jumping about. How did those voices come forward specifically, or was it just that it happened?
Thank you to those characters who spoke to me. That is literally true, because I would sometimes sit and meditate and think, Pua, please tell me what you want. What do you want me to say? Sarah, do you like Samuel and Isaiah or not? Tell me. You know, like, so it was um it was the characters telling me what they needed to say. So I was sort of like a witness. Um, and the fact that they're all distinct is because they all had different things to say. And it's just, writing is often such a spiritual practice in a lot of ways, in that a lot of what I wrote, I'm not consciously aware of writing it. Like I went back through the book a little bit last night and I thought, I wrote that? I don't remember writing that. Um, and something sort of takes over at some point, like when you're in the zone, as they call it. You're there, but it feels like something's coming from above and through your hands, and that you're just the conduit for whatever it is. And I know that sounds really mystical and weird, but at moments it feels that way. It feels as though something else is taking over and that I'm just the conduit for whatever it is. So the reason why those characters are all distinct and maybe feel full is because I was lucky enough for them to have me, to trust. They trusted me with their stories.
Well, it's really interesting you say that, because I do think one of the reasons for this book, and genuinely it has become one of my all-time favorite books ever, because when I was reading it, I felt as a reader like these characters were channeling through me. So I think by proxy, they've channeled through you, and then they're now going through all of us as we read the book, which is incredible. And I want to come back to that core voice, because I did wonder if you felt that, well, I felt like history was channeling through this book, and if and that kind of a history that's been silenced, because we you know, it's such a horrific time, everything that happened with slavery and that whole era, and obviously since. But yet this is a secret society almost within that secret world that nobody wanted to talk of. And how much was there a pressure on you, or did you at any point think, oh my goodness, in giving these voices who have been silenced voice, that's a huge amount of pressure? Did that scare you? Was it a challenge?
Everything about writing this novel terrified me, from ensuring that I was representing these characters in the fullest, most human way I possibly could, to the matters of race and gender and sexuality and gender identity that I am wrestling with in the work, because I knew that I had to be impeccable to a certain degree, so that opposition wouldn't feel like, aha, gotcha. And, you know, so I get to discount your whole book now because this thing didn't come out right. So I did tons and tons of research. You know, it's, there's some perspectives that the African parts of the chapter seem far-fetched, but every single thing I write in those chapters has some rootedness in actual pre-colonial African traditions. So they seem, to a Western mind, they seem fantastical. Like, what? Are you crazy? There were no such thing as homosexuals in Africa, and they didn't have ceremonies for guardians of the gates who were the two men who loved each other. Yes, they actually did. And I know it, to the Western mind, that seems outrageous, because of the way media presents it now is that Africa and homophobia are sort of linked. But the truth of the matter is that homophobia is what was imported from Europe to Africa. Prior to colonialism, as Esther Arma, the artist and activist who is of Ghanaian descent, says, sexuality in my tribe, in my culture, was like the land. There were no borders, and so all of this stuff was so necessary and so important to me to include in the book, so that we could have, so I could reinscribe into the cultural narrative the people who have been erased. But yes, it was a tremendous amount of pressure, and I was terrified.
Well, you've done amazingly, because I think it is, like I said, a phenomenal piece of work, and I think those ancestors would be, and a lot of comments have said this, incredibly proud of what you've achieved. I want to talk about the homosexuality angle, because this is obviously written in a time, and this is very rarely done. I can only think of one other book where I've read this, which was Patrick Gale's A Place Called Winter, where it's written in a time where homosexuality wasn't even a thing. Well, it was, but it didn't have a label, and it was just men who loved each other, and that is, you write about it in such a brilliant way, because we see it from these two characters who love is just for them love, and that's what they don't even try and name it. I mean, they sometimes question it, but they don't really try and name it. But also we see it from other people who, because it has no name, reject it. Some people don't question it, but some people reject it. How freeing, but at the same time, how challenging is it to write about that love when it had no name?
It was, with a modern mind, extremely challenging, because we live in a time where everything has to have a label. We relentlessly box things in, and everyone has to have a label, and if they don't, then we're a suspect of them. So it was hard, because I had to say, this wasn't called queer, it wasn't called homosexuality. If anything, it was called sodomy. That might have been it. That they were Samuel and Isaiah might have been thought of as sodomites. That was as close as we can get it. That the idea of two men in love was absolutely foreign to many people during that time period. But whenever people say, there were no homosexuals back then, because it that identity wasn't invented yet. That would be like saying there were no black people in Africa because that identity wasn't invented yet. It just, yes, they were black, they just didn't call themselves that. And yes, they were gay, queer, bisexual, transgender, whatever names you want to use, but they just didn't call themselves that. Because part of the heterosexist gaze is that anything other than heterosexuality is abnormal, and that we are, as queer people, something happened to us to make us this way. That we were initially heterosexual until some trauma or something horrible that knocked us off our path. But the truth of the matter is that we are natural to the landscape. We are as human gets. Queerness, same-sex love, same-sex sex, whatever you want to call it, transgenderness, has existed since human beings have existed. All of these constructs and labels came after. So it was hard, because I had to strip away all the things that I had learned living in American society, and said, what's at the core of Samuel and Isaiah? And it was their love. They didn't go, oh my God, I'm in love with a man. They just said, I love this person, and I don't care about anything else that transpires.
And without any spoilers, that's very much how Zara and Samuel feel, until other people start to become involved, and then they start to question their own relationship. But I don't want to say any more than that. What I do want to talk about a little bit is two characters that, again, I don't want to give too much away, but they were really, I think they're very pivotal in the book. And one is Amos, who I saw him as your way of writing how people can become bigoted, and the different ways in which that can happen. And I saw that with Amos, it was kind of, how can I put it? something happens to him that makes him focus his bitterness on them.
Well,
It's almost like
Amos is
the villain story, how people can become villainous, I guess. Oh,
that is true.
We've lost your sound, Robert.
He has the best of intentions. He is trying to save his wife.
It's all right. We've got a tiny delay. It will catch up with itself. This is the joy of doing events in a pandemic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. It's just catching up a little bit. Sorry. It was Amos. I think it might be the ancestors. They're not happy about Amos.
Can you hear me? Am I back? Oh, it's freezing up a little bit.
It'll catch up. It'll catch up. We just need to give it a little bit of time. Oh. I'm going to let it catch up. It will suddenly do it where it will suddenly catch up. What I can do, Robert, is if you leave the group, if you leave it and then I'll bring you back in. Let's see if that works. Sorry, everybody. It's a pandemical glitch. Will be 1 second when we're back with you. Let's find Robert and see if we can get him back in. Sorry about this, everybody. 2021, it's already giving us a time. So I've invited Robert back. Hopefully this will fix the glitch, not flick the glitch. I'm just gonna have a sip of tea, sorry everybody. And hopefully Robert will be back with us. There we go.
Am I back?
Yes.
Okay. So we were talking about
discussing Amos. Nobody was happy about this.
Amos was upset. So Amos has the best of intentions. He doesn't hate Samuel and Isaiah,
no.
But he wants them to stop thinking of themselves for the benefit of the group, which is an ages old tension, individuality versus community. And he's willing to use whatever is at his disposal to not only, because he's doing it also for somewhat selfish but selfless reasons.
Yes.
He wants to protect someone, and he thinks that this is a really good way to do it. And he's torn about it. He's not like, I'm so glad I'm going to get these two or what have you. He's torn up about it. Because he's in this impossible position, but he has to make a choice. And so he does. He's actually, to me, one of the more like then when encountered with this situation, but also what they might have behaved like now.
A little bit. I think we're having another slight technical. It's obviously clearly talking about some of the characters. Things are not happy. Another character that I found fascinating was Ruth. And one of the things that I wanted to mention her for is the fact that you go into the narratives of some incredibly, I don't want to say villainous characters, because what you do brilliantly is you don't apply morals to people. People are people, they have their history, and you want to give everybody's viewpoint, which is incredibly difficult. And one thing I have to say about this book is that it is some of the most beautiful writing I've ever read, but it's also brutal. It can be very brutal. How did you go about getting into those characters' narratives, or allowing those voices to come through you?
In particular, the slave owning characters were hard to imagine. I
I
had
can
to
hear
prepare
you.
myself.
It's doing this weird lagging thing. It keeps freezing. I think honestly, the ancestors are with us. They're tr- they're trying to communicate at the same time. Should we let's try and do that start thing again? Let's give it a third try.
Should we go out and in again?
So sorry about this. Honestly, clearly some of the ancestors are not happy with us talking about some of the more villainous characters, is how I would put it, or some of the more difficult characters. So let's try it again. Let's see if we can make this happen. Because there's so much we want to talk about. We haven't even got to one of the parts of the book, which is both horror and hope, which is the just as Rob Jones, I was about to talk about the fucking room, but we'll save that for a second.
Whoa. You were talking about the characters like Ruth. How did I get into their heads? It was very difficult because what I had to say to myself is, what could make a person behave this way? What could make a person think that it was okay to treat another person like a piece of garbage, like it's something to be owned, something to be dehumanized, to be used? Um, and the only thing that I could grasp is they were taught that. Or they were so brutalized themselves that they thought that this was the proper way to treat other people. And so you see that a little bit in Ruth, is that she comes from some abusive backgrounds. So abuse to her comes naturally. And it, for many people, love and abuse can become confused. They could do, self-harm. They could harm other people and call it love. It's, very interesting. So it was just a matter of trying to strip away all the dogma and say, at core, what makes a person cruel? What makes them evil to someone else? Like, what is that? And it was just the process of just asking that question that I have eventually arrived at characters like Ruth and Paul. And
Now, I want to talk about the plantation, which you call empty. And actually, that links in because there's emptiness within every character in many ways, or there's that everyone seems to be searching to find fulfillment, I guess, the opposite of empty. Was that intentional?
yes, the characters actually told me that that was the name of the plantation. In fact, I didn't know that it was called the Elizabeth Plantation until I got to starting writing about Paul. I had thought that, okay, this plantation is called Empty, and that's how I'm going to refer to it. But then when I was writing Paul, I realized, well, or he was telling me, no, Elizabeth, I get it. Okay. So I just allowed it to be. Is it still
No,
freezing?
you're there. I think every so often it lags a bit and then you catch up.
Okay.
So, in terms of the emptiness we discussed, there's also, and this probably will break the internet. In fact, maybe that's what we're doing, Robert. We're just breaking the internet because we're like the literary version of Kim Kardashian. But one thing that I think surmises the whole book, and is kind of a way I suppose we can sort of wind down the conversation a little bit, but is the fucking room, which is a room within the plantation where awful things happen. However, and this is what I think you do brilliantly throughout the whole book, is there are conversations that happen in that room between certain characters that are beautiful. There are moments that are beautiful amongst the horror. And you do that throughout the book. Was that your way of adding some hope for the voices that have been silenced?
Yes, because one thing I wanted to shy away from doing was presenting slavery as Black people are simply miserable, that they have no lives outside of the enslavement, that they have no interior lives, no thoughts, no loves of their own, no dimensionality. So when I do delve into moments of horror, and there are many, they're sometimes undercut by the complexities of the characters' reactions to certain situations, the humanity they share in certain situations, and that the love they have, even the moments they have with one another, does providing a fullness. And in particular, the fucking place, real history. Slave masters used to have farms where they would farm out their enslaved
Oh, I think we've got the lag again.
captives
I think we've
to
got the lag
procreate
again.
and
Why?
make more slaves for them. So
I keep getting
these
bits
things
of it.
are
What I think I will suggest is, and I'll suggest this on behalf of Quercus, ourselves, even though you've not agreed to it yet, Robert, and to Waterstones, but I think we should try and record a video on Zoom that we can then put out, so that we can have a project, because the technology is going well. I think it's also the time, because in America, everything's getting busy. Here, everything's getting busy. But I just want to say, before I say goodbye to you, this is phenomenal. Thank you so, so much for writing it. Thank you to your ancestors for kind of channeling it, or however that has come about. And also, I just want to say that I have seen nothing but love for this book on the internet today. I've never seen so much love for a book. And I hope this wins all the prizes. I hope everyone reads it. Get your signed copy from Waterstones, or borrow the book from your libraries. Demand your library stock it, the whole works. Get it from wherever you can. It's absolutely fantastic. But as we're on Waterstones, make sure that you go to Waterstones first. But hopefully, Robert and I will be able to film something that we will be able to put on social media elsewhere, because honestly, I want it to make it my mission this year for everyone to read this book. So Robert, again, thank you so, so, so much. It's been a joy. Sorry about the ancestors. They've been very naughty this evening.
it is always a pleasure to speak with you.
And you. And I'm going to let you go now, but have a fantastic rest of publication day, publication week. Go as wild as you can in the pandemic, but just have the best time. And I can't wait to speak to you again soon.